dear guests, dear speakers, on behalf of the Eurasian Universities Union, I would love to greet you all. Thank you for your time. As a Eurasian Universities Union, today we will be hosting our guests, and we will have our webinar on design of the online learning environments with the partnership, our Wiley Education Services. So I would love to give the speech to our Ms. Ayşe Deniz Özkan. She will be continuing. Ayşe Hocam.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Sabina. Today we are having a good partnership webinar with Wiley. As Yuri, just a few weeks ago, we had the International Education Conference, Eurasian Higher Education Summit, and Wiley was one of our sponsors and collaborative partners at URI, and they organized this panel on online education design, and it was very interesting, and it met with a lot of interest and questions as well. So we decided to do something similar at EURAS with a webinar, and we will continue this cooperation between EURAS on the one hand and Wiley Education Services on the other, because Wiley is one of the companies out there who has been dealing with online education for a very long time and has tremendous experience and a lot of partnerships in this regard. So I think during this pandemic, while we are all sort of grappling with issues of this sudden unexpected pivot to online education, there's a lot we can sort of learn from the expertise of Wiley and bring to EURAS members, some ideas, some experiences, possibly later on other collaborations. In fact, we are planning to do, for example, with Wiley, a short survey on how EURAS partners are dealing with this online education. What is our current thinking in our universities about online education, our current challenges, and how to improve them? So Marta will mention this, I know, in her speech, but we have like a short little sort of survey coming up soon with Wiley, and we can continue later with other activities. We are open to your suggestions as well in this regard, how we can sort of cooperate with Wiley and other companies who have expertise in online education. I want to introduce Marta Çolakoğlu, and she's the moderator today. She's an international sales manager at Wiley. She will, as the moderator, introduce our distinguished speakers, our panelists. Marta, you are in charge of keeping the time. Hopefully we'll have some time at the end of our webinar for some questions from our audience addressed to our distinguished panelists. Thank you. Marta, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ayşe. Thanks a lot. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Wiley webinar, where we will talk about Wiley and our university partnerships. First of all, I want to say thank you to EURAS, who host us today, and to all members who has joined. Thank you very much. Wiley, in case if you don't know who we are, is a research and educational company. We have 210 years of educational experience behind us, including 20 years of creating world-class online education solutions. We have supported the success of over 70 universities, employers, and learners worldwide in this time. And especially for EURAS, we have prepared a short survey, and I would like to kindly ask you to fill it up, please. It won't take longer than 2 minutes of your time, but it will help us to understand the market and especially your needs. I'm going to share the link for the survey in a chat box, and then I will send it to all of you after the webinar in the follow-up email. Yeah. Ayşe has kindly introduced myself and let me do it again. My name is Marta Çolakolu and I'm sales manager at Wiley Educational Services International Group. And today I'm happy to participate this webinar with two of my colleagues, David Rosen and Adam Matthews. Let me introduce David Rosen. David is the Director of Academical Services at Wiley Educational Services based in UK, Chichester, where he manages a team of learning designers and learning technologists and student support coordinators. David and his team are responsible for designing and supporting our online courses for Wiley's partner universities in UK, Europe, Middle East, and Australia. David is working at online learning over 12 years as a learning designer and online learning director. He has previously worked as a teacher and a teacher trainer. And let me come to our second speaker today, Adam Matthews. Adam is a lecturer in technology and learning environments at the University of Birmingham, UK, and lead academic at new postgraduate program called Design for Learning Environments. University of Birmingham is partner with Wiley Educational Services on this new program, which is set to launch in June this year. Adam's research interest covers the relationship between education and technology. And have a good webinar. I'm happy to pass hand over to my colleague, David Rosen, please.
Thanks, Marta. Thank you. Thank you. Adam, let's jump straight in and let's talk about that program that Marta just mentioned, the Design for Learning Environments for University of Birmingham. It's an online course that online program rather, that you're developing with Wiley learning designers. Could you just tell us a bit more about the program and perhaps give us a glimpse of, I know you haven't completed the first module yet, just to give us a glimpse of what you've got.
Sure, thanks, David. So yeah, the program is called Design for Learning Environments, and you may see other programs that are named something slightly differently. So you may have heard of the term instructional designer or learning designer, which I think we'll probably talk a little bit about as we go through. But we're talking about design for learning environments in the very broadest sense. So we're talking about what does design mean, and we talk about how that works with technology in learning environments. And by a learning environment, I mean anything really: a school, a college, a university, or a website. So my research interest is how those things merge. So how does the online and the offline merge together? Because I think we're moving now into a more mature position where which has been sort of jettisoned really by COVID, where we are looking at the online and the learner embedded into their experience. So we may see a blended situation where we have lectures on campus and seminars, but there's also online resources for students, and that is blended together. So we're using design theory and principles from design to try and pull all that together for students who attend the course.
Can we get a glimpse of the course? Can you
sure, yeah. If I share my screen, what we'll do throughout the session is I'll share my screen and we'll show you some glimpses of the course, but also not just kind of the shiny end product. We'll kind of show you the nuts and bolts of how we got there in that kind of design process. So what I will do is share my screen. And we use Canvas as our virtual learning environment, and we are collaborating with partners at Wiley and internally at the University of Birmingham. This is the shiny front page. This is kind of the stuff that you'll see as a student on the Design for Learning Environments course. And we would go into the second page then of the course, and we can see that it's broken down into 8 separate units. This is a 10-credit module, which is ran over 8 weeks. It's fully online, and we break that down for students. So what you can see on screen now is what we've developed, what we would call a learner journey. So we've taken the learning outcomes and we've broken down what students will do. I'll give you a sneak peek of unit 1. So unit 1, we ask what is design. The module is called Design and Design Thinking. So that first week is what do we actually mean by design. A lot of people think when we say design, people talk about graphic design quite a lot, but we mean design in its broadest sense. So we draw upon fields of architecture, graphic design, industrial design. And if you were to ask me what does design mean, for me, it's putting things together and making them work. So when we design a learning environment, we look at every single element of that. So the role of a designer is to get that to work together. So that's what we do in this first module. And what you'll see there, as we go down the list of tasks for students, there's a whole bunch of different things that we ask them to do. So we've got some key reading, we've got some pages that they would read. So for example, we have an explore page, we call them explore pages, and saying what is design? And an explore page looks a little bit like this. So we have a bunch of content that students read, and then they move on to the next stage. But then they integrate with videos, with discussions, with different activities. We're not just purely doing passive kind of reading. Students are asked to do stuff, and they can do this at any time they want. So our target audience of students will generally be part-time and people who are working, so they can schedule this in whenever they like. So that's a little bit different to kind of doing live lectures on Zoom. But that's a sneak preview. I think we'll get into a bit more of that, of how we got there and what we do as we talk further, David.
So yeah, you talked about design there, Adam, and I guess I do want to ask you about how you as a subject matter expert work with a learning designer, but perhaps before we even get to that, we should unpack what do we mean by learning design. So you know, what's the learning design that's happening on your course? How is it happening?
Sure. So I think it's important to ask, what is learning design? It's a really good question, and that's the skill of the learning designer. But I'll just kind of do a bit of background really on the role. So I have worked as a learning designer in the past, or an instructional designer, you may have heard the term. So for the last kind of 20 years or so, these roles have really started to emerge. So an instructional designer and a learning designer, and there's probably lots of other different terms. Learning technologist kind of is a bit more technical, but in essence, this role has emerged as new technologies have come on stream. So universities and employers employ these people to work with subject matter experts to get courses online. So to give you an example, I used to work for a global travel company who looked to train their staff. Their staff are global. So if you work for a travel company, you've got retail outlets, you've got an airline, and you've got hotels all over the world. Getting training and learning and development to those people is really tough and actually really expensive to actually get them to come out of their locations or people to go to them. So putting it online is a great opportunity to do that. And so sort of early 2000s, people started to do that. So I worked in that area. Universities now are doing the same thing. Of course, the global pandemic has kind of pushed us on really quickly to do that, but universities as well. So I've done that quite a lot. And the Open University in the UK has been doing distance learning since the 1960s, where they used to send things out through the post. Now it's all online. But that role of getting things online and working with a subject matter expert, I think it's evolved more now. The term now tends to be called learning designer, and that learning designer, I would define that as being an expert in teaching and learning, in what we may sometimes call pedagogy or learning theory. They've got a really good appreciation of that, but they're also designers in the way that, or how do we get this course together? They will really kind of structure that. How does that work, from a student signing up through to the journey that they take through the course to working with a subject matter expert. And David, you mentioned how do I work with a learning designer? So that relationship is really important. I think what we may have experienced in universities in the past is that one person, the researcher, the teacher, they do everything. I think that is changing and evolving, and I think that's a real positive, because if we're asking people to research, we're asking them to teach, we're also asking them to become experts in video, experts in multimedia design, experts in pedagogy. I think that's unrealistic. So collaborating in more of a team effort to design courses is a much better way to go. Firstly, from the perspective of the technical skills, so learning technologists can get under the bonnet and make this thing work for you, which is really good. But a learning designer, and the learning designer and the academic, or the learning designer and the subject matter expert, have got a really important role, because they will work together to form the course. Now, myself as an academic, I know lots of stuff about my subject area. Some would say too much. So I might want to overload a student with that. I might want to tell them about my latest research. I might want to go into the detail of every single thing. that's not really what a part-time student wants. We need to really pull out what they need. Yes, they may go and read some of my research in the future. Yes, they might go off and look at other things, but we want to kind of give them the entry point into that body of knowledge. And a learning designer can really challenge me, and a team of people, we can bounce ideas around. But a learning designer can say to me, Adam, they don't need to know about everything that you know. This is kind of what they need to know. So we set the learning objectives at the start, and we kind of work that through. And working in a team environment is great, because I might have an idea and we might develop that further, or the learning designer might have an idea and we might work that through together. So so collaborating is really good, I think.
Yeah, I want to pick on one of the things you were starting to say there about the student, the kind of context of the student on an online course, which often is quite different from the context of the student that comes into your campus classroom or lecture hall. They're often part-time. They're balancing a lot of kind of conflicting priorities and things. So so that design process that you're going through is trying to focus the content exactly around what that student needs to study in order to achieve the learning outcomes. And so, as you say, trying to take away all the perhaps extraneous content which is you're passionate about and you're really interested about, but doesn't necessarily take them on a learning journey or a learning path towards the outcomes you've got on your course. So is that what the designer's doing, actually helping you just to focus in on what's actually important?
Exactly, yeah. It gives you that real focus and structure. And I mentioned design as a discipline at the start, where there's lots of design that goes on in lots of different places. I say graphic design, fashion design, interior design. You're probably usually working for a client, and you're usually working to design an artifact for a user.
Yeah.
So you'll usually do an analysis of what that user wants, or what we want that user to be able to do. So for example, an architect will meet a client. Well, what kind of building do you want? And the designer will work to do that. A fashion designer might design something, an interior designer, but you're always looking at your end user. An engineer looks at the end user. So we're thinking about that learner and what they're doing. So there's a real analysis there. And I think it's a really, really important point that we should think about that. Of course, we don't sometimes know who our students are going to be when we're developing these modules, but we can broadly kind of look at what level and what they'll be doing. So for example, we can say that the course I'm currently developing, it's a postgraduate course at a research intensive university, the University of Birmingham, and our students are going to be part-time and probably working. That is very, very different to a first year undergraduate degree, where we're looking at predominantly 18-year-olds who are used to being in a school environment. We're going to treat that very, very differently. So for example, it's a real advantage for me, for the students that I'm working with, to be working in current roles, because they can bring that experience in and we can have some great conversations. So this course is going to be for students globally. So we may have people all over the world working in different roles, and we'll be looking at research, and we'll be looking at different theories and concepts, and we'll be working those through together, which is a really good opportunity. So I'm just part of that group, right? Then I just work with the students, and we all collaborate together. If we go back to the kind of undergraduate, which we've been thrown into really. So in the pandemic, we've been thrown into this scenario where students who expected to be on campus for 3 years learning in a campus environment with lectures and seminars have just been thrown online. Now, we can learn a lot from what we've done with postgraduate teaching and learning online, but I think we just need to remember that is a very different scenario, and we're always looking at the target audience. So yes, that's a kind of a comparison. Always think about what your student knows and what they're doing.
One thing that interests me looking at your course is the kind of proportion of live teaching or support, which we best would call synchronous, and then the asynchronous element. And learning for me is like a three-step process. You have to get the student to notice that something new there or something they don't know. Then you've got to get them to construct meaning or co-construct meaning with a peer or with a teacher themselves. And then you've got to help them to somehow transfer that from a short-term memory into a long-term memory. That's pretty easy activities to do if you're live teaching on a course and you've got your students in front of you. How, through your asynchronous design, how do you manage to achieve that kind of learning journey for the student?
So very, very task-based. So by having students who are working or carrying out these roles, we're asking them to carry out tasks based on the content. But what I'll do is I'll share my screen. So I've showed you the I've showed you the shiny end of what it looks like at the end. Let's go back right to the beginning where we kind of have a blank piece of paper that we work from. So I will share my screen again. And we're kind of in amongst the weeds a little bit here, so it's not quite as shiny, but this is kind of how we design. So the first thing I would say, if we're designing, I would start with a blank piece of paper and a pencil. That's kind of my design process. So a lot of people will jump straight to the virtual learning environment or digital tools, but a learning designer will kind of force you down that route as well. So these documents that I'm showing on screen just show you the amount of documentation that we go through and the amount of thinking we do before we put anything online. And if I just skip through, this is just a document where we look at the 8 units. So my first task from the learning designer was to say, let's break your module down into 8 specific units. It's covered over 8 weeks. And that's what we've got there. And we've got some learning outcomes for each of those units. That takes us to this document, which is a PowerPoint slide where you will see six cards that we call them. And this is what students are doing. So we attribute the learning outcomes using these cards. So you can see we've got an acquire card here. Acquire is generally reading stuff, reading or watching videos. But what can happen, and what can happen to me, is I might give them too much acquisition. So as I said earlier, I could just say, oh, I'll go and read all my journal articles, go and read all the stuff that I've done and then take the exam. But that is not an active learning process. So that is not that process that David, that you just described, where we're getting people interested, we're getting them to kind of formulate their own knowledge and apply that. So by using these other tools, so asking students to research, asking them to practice, to discuss, reflect and assess, we're kind of giving them tasks to do throughout that week. And I'll just take you on the full journey to show you then the next document. We kind of write the content into the pages.
So I'm just to interrupt you. So if I understood that correctly, then you've got a kind of balance of those things you just said. So there is content that they're perhaps viewing or reading, but then there's also activity that you're requiring them to do, whether it be a kind of reflection or a research piece or something like that.
Exactly. So what I'll do is I'm going to share what a unit might look like then from this card sorting activity. So you might kind of look at this screen. Sorry if people have kind of seen that, and it's kind of a bit of a mess, but that's kind of what's going on in my head, right? And we've got to get it onto that piece of paper and to that PowerPoint. So that's mapping that out, and you can see, because we've got a bunch of different colors, it means we're giving students different activities to do to build up the learning outcomes. If you were to just see a light blue color there, acquire, a learning designer would say, we've probably got too much reading and passive learning there. We might just be asking students to sit and read stuff and watch videos, which from a learning theory perspective is not good. We want people to be actively engaging with that content. And we can do that by asking students to kind of reflect on their own experiences or go and actually do things. So for example, we have in week 3 of the first module of the postgraduate certificate in learning environments, we ask students to write a blog and we give them feedback on it. So we are collaborating with students in some work that they're doing. We're not just either talking at them or carrying that out. So you can see how this is built up. We write some of that content into documents such as this, which then gives us the kind of nice shiny looking page that you can see there as it goes through that development process. And David, you also mentioned how does the synchronous and asynchronous work? So a lot of people make decisions to do live Zoom lectures. So for example, the kind of thing I'm doing now, where it's a bunch of slides and we lecture as we would in a campus-based environment. We've made the design decision on this module not to do any of that. All of the Zoom sessions that we do are going to be drop-ins exactly like this. So we're going to have a couple of sessions on a Tuesday in the morning UK time and the evening UK time for everybody just to come on, and I won't prepare any slides. I will turn up and I will talk to students about the course and about the module and what they're doing, and we'll have that as a conversation. So we've made that as a decision. Some other people may not decide to do that. You know, we've got other courses at the University of Birmingham where there are live lectures and questions happen afterwards. But that's a design decision. We've kind of made that decision for various reasons. But that just shows there isn't just one way of doing this. There are lots of different options, and there are different factors that play into this. You know, lecturers' availability, students' availability, all of that kind of stuff. These are all things to think about.
And is one of the factors too that the live lecture may be a bit passive, and the student might just be listening or viewing rather than actually the active learning you were just talking about going out and doing stuff. So the approach you're taking is actually driving them to take more autonomy and do more things themselves as part of their study. Exactly,
yeah. So having a 1 hour lecture delivered every week, we can record that stuff. We can make a really nice polished version of it and record it, and we can even break that up. So this is a brand new course. We're starting from scratch, but other colleagues at the University of Birmingham may take their 1 hour lectures that they deliver on campus and break those up into 10-minute chunks where we intersperse it with activities. In my research, the big thing about technology and the big thing about online learning is time and space has been totally redefined. So I often say at the University of Birmingham, we've got a big, massive clock tower that chimes on the hour. And what will happen is on the hour, you'll see students all walking around going to different lectures. We're kind of dictated by that we do our lectures by the hour. And that's why we do it, right? Because it works, you know, the people in timetabling are really happy about that. But when you put it online, all that's gone. We've got no clock tower going off. So we can do whatever we want, which is a problem sometimes, because having a blank piece of paper in front of you is kind of like, wow, what do I do? So it's structuring it for the student.
But if there are no live lectures from the teacher or the instructor on the course, what's the teacher instructor doing? What value are they? How can they add value to the course?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think if you take away that time of that live lecturing that you're doing over and over again, I think it really frees up lecturers and teachers to work with students. And I think in the UK, we've got a problem with assessment and feedback. We have a national student survey that we do nationally, and assessment and feedback is one of the really, really big low scorers that we have. So I think if we can get teachers giving feedback to students on their work, that is so much more contextualized for the student, whether that be, you know, a detailed piece of feedback on some assessed work that they do, or whether that's a 10 or 15-minute conversation where we can do some personal tutoring or small groups to talk about that. That is what students are kind of getting more value from, I believe. So I think we can present our content, we can present the activities, we can set out what we think the learning journey is for the students, and then we can really maximize that working with them. And I had a conversation with admissions yesterday about kind of how do students apply and what do you want to hear in applications. I kind of want to hear interesting stuff from students. I want to hear what they're doing and what their interests are and what they're going to bring to this to work with me, because I want to know what they're doing and I want to kind of share my research, but I want to kind of collaborate together with that. So yeah, I think it's trying to do it in a smart way where you don't just lecture all the time.
So the teacher's role's changing a bit from the imparter of knowledge to more of a facilitator of learning, actually supporting that learning process I was talking about earlier of transferring to long-term memory, helping students to actually challenging students to kind of apply that knowledge to their mental models or previous learning experience they've got.
I think so. I've got a caveat there. I think a really good lecture is really good. So there's a lot of sort of technology focused people who will say that's the death of the lecture. There's no more lecture. I don't agree with that, because a really great lecture from an expert in their field who's passionate about what they do is the best thing, I think. Not necessarily the best thing, but it's a really good thing. And something I do on YouTube, if there's an author or a writer or researcher that I like, I go on YouTube and look for their lectures and I watch them. But I think that there's also the other aspects of that, right, where we want students actively doing stuff and working with these academics. So
yeah, okay.
The lecture isn't dead, I don't think, but we can do other stuff as well.
What about what about assessment? A lot of our university partners ask us about how do you do assessment and online courses. And I think, you know, they're worried about the integrity of it. They're worried about the kind of format that you might use. So what's your approach on this course to assessment? How are you thinking it through?
So we've really thought really deeply about assessment on this program. People are, again, we're doing who are our target audience. We're thinking about them. We're thinking about what position they're in, and we've decided that what we want to do is every piece of assessment that the student does on this course, we want them to take it away and be able to use it. We want it to be a useful thing.
Yeah.
So for example, this first module that we're currently doing, the assessment is to write a blog about designing learning environments that we give them some feedback on. But the final piece of assessment is for them to kind of identify their own design philosophy. So we talk about lots of different approaches to design, but we want them to reflect upon that and come up with their own design philosophy for their own context. So that is a really contextualized thing for them. They're putting into context a lot of the material that we're presenting. So that's really unique to them. They can't, no one can plagiarize that because it's their own practice. And that's slightly different, of course, for a postgraduate part-time course for people who are working. But actually getting people to do stuff that they can take away is really good. So we have a data science module on this where we ask students to analyze some data. Now, we really encourage them, if they can, to get some data from their own learning environment, either from, you know, their university that they were at or the place of work where they are, to come and analyze it and then use it. You know, you go and use it in the workplace, and the same goes for everything. So once they've gone through all of these modules, we have a packages of things that they could use in job interviews, that they could use with employers to say, this is what we've done. And personally, I don't think online really makes a difference in that. I think we need to think a lot more about assessment. I think putting people in a 200-seater exam hall has never been very good. So I think this might give us the opportunity to change that.
And what's your kind of balance between formative and summative? Have you got like 100% summative assessment at the end of the course, or are you breaking it down? How are you approaching that?
We do have on the first module, we break down the summative assessment. So on week 3, we ask, as I say, we ask them to write the blog, but that is more about giving them feedback on their writing and their approach before the final summative assessment. My own personal view on summative and formative assessment. So if we're using technical jargon, just to quickly say, summative assessment is the graded assignment at the end, and formative assessment is the stuff that we do with students, those tasks. I think every single task that a student does should be formative. We should treat that as formative assessment. And that was the stuff I was saying about academics and teachers working with students and giving them feedback as much as possible. We're giving them formative assessment there. And of course, you know, we all look at the summative assessment. I've been there, you know, that's all I care about at the end of the module, because that's what the university grades me on. But the other stuff is really important because that's what gets us to that grade. So I think there's almost a piece of education for students there as well. I think we should tell students that yes, the grade is important at the end because you're going to pass or fail the course, right? But how you get there is important, and we've really thought about that with the learning journey. We've kind of mapped that out, and have a bit of confidence in us. If you engage with these things, we think you'll do well in the summative assessment.
Yeah. I really liked what you said then about feedback being part of formative assessment, and actually we know from the surveys we carry out that students almost invariably want more feedback than they get, and that they crave it. It's really challenging given that you've got lots of formative tasks and lots of students on your module. So, you know, as a teacher, maybe you're not doing so much direct teaching, maybe you're doing more focus on feedback, but you know, there's a limit to how much you can do. So have you got any kind of tips or approaches for how to do that to make it a bit more manageable for people?
Sure, and you know, we've all got kind of financial and economic pressures from the accountants in universities who, you know, who are paying for this. It's an economic question, right? If you've got 300 students on a module, how do you give them individual feedback? And that's what we've been challenged to do with working with the learning designer, where you have to try and think of instances of what the kind of typical feedback is going to be, and you can create online simulations. So within the virtual learning environment, we can create scenarios where we ask students to come up with different answers. They click different options and they're given feedback. So that feedback is programmed in. We're not actually doing it ourselves. That's programmed in and set out. Of course, there's a lot of hope with artificial intelligence that we can kind of start to garner more of this data to kind of give students feedback. But I think that's the really, really important thing in the design of the module. If I say I'm going to spend an hour a week with every single student, it's not possible, right? You know, we've got lots of other things to do. We wouldn't be able to do it. So we've got to try and design that feedback and that kind of feedback loop into the system, and learning technologists and learning designers can help us to do that.
You alluded a little bit there to cost, you know, when I look at your course and when I see all the process you went through to design it, and you're working with a learning designer and a graphic designer and others, it feels like it would take quite a long time to do and actually be quite expensive. I suppose it would be fair to say that it's more expensive the first time than doing a talk course, but I guess you get to a position where you've actually published that course, you don't have to make too many changes to it the next time you run it and that, you know, thereafter. So, you know, you're putting the kind of investment in up front to then take the benefit from that as you go on.
Definitely, and there's a huge misconception about online. I think that it's cheap. It's the cheap option and the easy option, and it's not. I'm afraid if you do it properly, it's not. In the UK, during COVID, there's been a big uproar about online teaching and saying students should be getting refunds on their tuition fees, because I don't know where this thing has come from, that it's cheap and easy. It's not. You know,
yeah.
As David says, that 6 month kind of leading that we do on a 10 credit module, people kind of say, well, 6 months, why do you need all this time to do this? But it is really, really important to front end that work, because that pays off in dividends afterwards. So you do the 6 month development, but then that course runs and runs and runs, not on its own, of course. You still have to give that feedback and be present in the course, but it is still there. So yeah, I would put the work in up front, and I think that is kind of the big kickback. And David, I'm sure you can talk about this more, about the different partners that you work with. But I've certainly sat in meetings at the University of Birmingham where people have said, well, why should it take 6 months? We can do it quicker than that. But take it from me, I think 6 months is a pretty good time frame for a 10 credit module.
Yeah, I mean, it's one that we pretty much settled on in the UK. I think, you know, there are always commercial pressures to try and do it more quickly, and I think we would like to be able to do that. We'd like to be able to do it in 22 or 20, but you know, you've got a process where you've got a design, you've got and as you just showed us, that design starts with pencil and paper. So that's the phase that you then get onto the building it. You've then got to test it and make sure that it all works properly before you release it to the students. So there's lots of functional testing of links, etc. So I think you do need that amount of time, but certainly the most valuable time is the first few weeks and the focus you put into how you design it.
Mm. And I should say that we've started from scratch on this program. We had nothing before.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
A more common, I guess, a more common sort of approach that you work with different universities is that you're taking a campus-based face-to-face course and you're putting it online.
Yeah.
So that, in some ways, I think it's probably maybe harder to do that because you've got quite a lot of deeply entrenched ways of working. Yeah. So it's kind of taking what's there and putting it online, which some people might say, oh, we can quite easily do that by just transferring it all. But there is still that amount of work, I think, to pick it apart and kind of do that. So, I think I'm probably in a fortunate position that I'm starting from scratch, and you know.
Yeah, and of course there are other benefits, sorry for interrupting, like we do marketing and student services and do market research and, you know, data analysts for all of our university partners, because we're taking the biggest responsibility. All of our partnerships are longer than 5 and nearly 10 years. So we're taking the most responsibility for delivery of our programs. And I can see that we got the question here, guys. If you, I think it's more David question. I think it's more for you. If you want, I can read it and you can answer it, please. Yeah, the question is, how can the design for online learning can facilitate universities to collaborate with each other for cross-learning and exchange? Kindly comment if this is the areas that can be created through this.
I suppose I can only comment there in the context of Wiley. So Wiley has a network of partners in the UK and the US. We have mechanisms within our network that allow universities to collaborate and to work together on projects to do with online learning. We call that faculty fellows scheme, and we run that out of the US. So there are ways to do that. Whether that's so easy if you're not within a network like that, I'm not so sure. I don't know, Adam, whether you've got any sense of that from UOB.
It's an interesting question because in terms of research in universities, we collaborate with everyone, right? You know, we work with a lot of people all over the world. Teaching's not quite the same, and maybe I have seen articles in the media around universities should do this more, should sort of collaborate with online materials. Of course, you know, in the UK, certainly, policy has kind of advocated that universities are competitors with each other in teaching. So how does that work with collaboration? I think that's an interesting kind of move. It kind of goes beyond the design a little bit, where you're getting into commercial relationships and kind of those collaborations. But I think it's certainly an interesting area. We are developing our postgraduate certificate, so there are 6 10-credit modules as micro-credentials. So this is a new area, certainly in Europe, that is starting to be looked at. So FutureLearn, and I think some work in the EU are starting to look at micro-credentials, where you can take 10, 20 credit modules and kind of stack them up. So we've allowed that. So for this module, you can take one of our 10 credit modules as a standalone and then start to build them up, or just do one. Hopefully we would like people to kind of do one and say, this is really good, I want to do the whole module. So we'll start to build those up. So I think it's an emerging area. I think it's globally and kind of more locally how universities and quality assurance work with that. So I think the ideal would be if you can do modules with different universities and bring them together into one bigger qualification. We're not there yet, but that is certainly some of the talk. And there's platforms such as FutureLearn and Coursera that are doing that. But that they are more platforms. So I think it's more about the quality assurance and the accreditation of that, where universities need to work together. But I think it's definitely something for the future, especially in terms of lifelong learning, where students remain kind of in contact with their university or different universities to develop their skills throughout their life, so not just within one course. So yeah, it's a really interesting question. I haven't got the answer, but it's probably a development that's gonna probably be hastened by COVID, and we'll see where we go.
Thank you very much, Adam. Thank you, David. It was really interesting and good answer. We have one more question, please. Yeah, may I ask you, how important is the student-to-student interaction in the course design? What is the ideal ratio, and for lecturers for action?
So you broke up at that, Marta, but I heard the first part. Yeah, I heard the first part, so I'll start with that, which is about how important is student interaction. Very important. I think the pedagogy that we follow with online learning, community of inquiry, has been established for a long time. Talks a lot about social learning and actually the value of students working together to construct meaning. I think that's very important in a face-to-face classroom. It's just as important online. So we would be looking for uses of discussions and group projects, wikis, where students can work together to and possibly even in an assessment activity as well, where it's a group assessment. So very important. I don't know whether you've built that into DFLE, Adam, at all yet, but does it appear in your program?
Yeah, so as I said about kind of students coming in with their own experiences, I think it's great. Take me out of the equation as the lecturer. Actually, students working with each other in terms of sharing experiences of what they're doing. Now, if that was a classroom environment, it's pretty organic, right? You end up sitting next to someone and having a chat with them, and you sort of spark off some ideas. So it's much more, it has to be designed much more formally in online learning environments. And I think the field of educational technology has kind of failed a little bit. So we've had 20 years of this, and we're still just saying, oh, we'll just stick a discussion forum up there and people will just flood to it and end up having these great ideas. It doesn't work like that, unfortunately. We've all seen discussion forums that are just left with no one saying a word and silence. So they've really got to be planned. They've got to be activities that we ask people to do. Now, there's a bit of carrot and stick maybe here. Do we actually ask people to submit to a discussion forum and get some credit for it? So that I've seen a few designs where lecturers will do this and designers will do this, where you don't see everyone else's responses until you've responded yourself, and then you have to give feedback to your peers. So you're kind of forcing the conversation to credit, but it's making people do it, and then hopefully that will continue. And of course, who's to say what students do kind of outside of that formal virtual learning environment? We've all got WhatsApp groups now, so yeah, great if students want to create WhatsApp groups, let's encourage them to do that and go and speak away from this and kind of keep that connection going. So yeah, it's really important, but we need to foster it and kind of make it grow, really.
Yeah, I think it's also very important, isn't it? Because online learning can be a bit of a remote experience, and so therefore it's doubly important, I think, that your design involves students consulting each other, discussing, evaluating different opinions, so they feel more of a learning community on the actual program.
One thing we do, sorry David to interrupt, I was just going to say what was fresh in my head. The one thing that we do, because it's a bit of a strange course, we're talking about design for learning environments, and we are designing a learning environment for the students. So what we do is we ask them to kind of reflect on the design of the course. So we say to them, what do you think of this course? What could we have done better? And how would we do that? And we do that in various ways by saying, how could we have researched you better as a target audience? So yeah, so that it's kind of looking back at us. Obviously you can't do that with all, but depending on the subject matter, you could get people to do something in their local community and kind of bring that in. So it's not, I think it's important not to have students staring at the screen all the time. You don't have to, when you're online, you don't need to be looking at the screen. I can go out and do stuff and record stuff on my phone or kind of take notes, and I'm kind of in the place that I am, but not just looking at the screen. So yeah, that can be developed further as well.
I think we missed the second part of your question, Marta.
I've got a new one. I think it was a quite good answer. Yeah, in terms of time, we need to go to another question. Yeah, the question is, would you say that all the technologies needed for distance learning are in place? Is it now the responsibility of learning designers to create this engaging learning experience?
That's an interesting question. I mean, my kind of first instinctive response to that is online learning is not just about technology, it's about learning. Technology is the tool that will enable that enables online learning, but it's down to the actual design of the learning itself, which that's the important bit. So no, I doubt all the technology is in place. Technology will grow and evolve at huge speed, but we're not controlled by the technology. We've got design principles that we use. We create the conditions for learning, and the technologies are just a tool to enable us to do that, just as any technology that you would use in a face-to-face classroom. Would you agree, Adam, or you want to challenge me on that?
Well, I'll kind of bring in a bit of my research on this. So from a research perspective, I think it's really interesting, actually. I think, are we led by the technology, or do we use the technology as an instrumental tool? I think it's probably in the middle somewhere. So going into kind of philosophy of technology and theory of technology, which I do in some of my research, we kind of say that we don't always control technology because it does have an impact on us and what it does. However, I think as universities, we should be in a position where we are challenging vendors of technology to make systems better, because speaking really frankly, I don't think they're as good as they could be. I think we're making a good job of them at the moment, and we shouldn't just blame systems and say systems aren't very good. We've got virtual learning environments. You've seen an example of what we've managed to do with some of them, but I think the implementation of them and the kind of procurement of them, it's really, really important. So if anyone on the webinar is part of those decision-making processes, spending quite a lot of money with vendors, I think it's making sure that you get the right product for your institution, and the implementation of it is important. And I think that shouldn't just come down to educators either. I think within your institutions, if you've got IT, whether you've got procurement, that they should be involved. I'm not a very good person to implement a virtual learning environment. That's pretty clear. So we should be getting help from others to do that. So yeah. So the answer to the question, yeah, we've got some good technologies out there. Could they be better? Yes, but I think we've got all the tools in place that we can do stuff. It shouldn't stop us doing that. So, but I think it's a constant push as well from universities to try and make them better as well.
It's a really interesting point. I mean, is there a sorry to put you on the spot, but is there a particular technology that you think, or tool that you think actually this should be a lot better? There isn't something that does here what I would like it to do.
I think the problem that we're going down at the moment, speaking really frankly, is we end up with lots of different systems. So maybe if we were starting with scratch and nothing, it would be a lot easier, but we end up kind of bolting things together, which I think is problematic. I haven't seen, this isn't my area really, virtual learning environments. However, I kind of have seen presentations where these are the big four, people call them, I think. So I think it ends up being Blackboard, Moodle, Canvas, Brightspace. Brightspace. So all these are meant to be the best ones, and they're all right. They're they're okay, but I think
you're waiting for the next generation of learning management system. I
think so, but I mean, there's people talk about lots of different things. They talk about learning experience systems and that kind of thing. But I think making the best of what you've got is really important. Often you haven't got a decision as an educator, as a learning designer. You probably haven't got much say. Hopefully you have. You can influence that, but what you've kind of got to make the best of. And I think that's a designer's job. A designer's job is to kind of all the constraints that you may have, so taking into consideration where the student is, what they do, what you're trying to get across, but also what tools you've got to hand right. So making the best of that is important. But I think that there should be some better systems coming, and I think what tends to happen is you get a vanilla kind of implementation of a virtual learning environment, which institutions should probably try and personalize. And I think the biggest challenge for big universities is how do you implement that across the whole institution? How do you get a consistency? So what can happen is you end up with modules that all look different for different students when they go from module to module. I think trying to implement some kind of consistency is really, really tough. So you need to look at templates. One similarity, so if we have got sort of technically minded people here from universities, I think content management systems and university websites, we're probably about 10 or 15 years behind them, where I think there was that case of we just create pages here and there inconsistently. Now you'll see there's a real workflow of how content management systems, contact with students, all that kind of stuff, all these systems are much more streamlined. So it's much more structured. I think we're probably not there with virtual learning environments yet, but maybe post-pandemic, that's a kind of
I think it was a
forward push.
I'd also like to just kind of push back on that, not push back, but actually to go back to that point you made about asking students to do things which are not necessarily in front of a screen. Because I think when we talk about online learning, we tend to hear the first word and not the second word. And actually, it's about learning. It doesn't all have to be online. You can get students to go out and do things. So I think that's a really, really interesting point to make, and one that's usually missed in the discourse, I think.
It's really interesting. We always think we're at the cutting edge of technology, don't we? But in the 1960s in the UK, there was the organisation that I mentioned before, the Open University. And we're quite nostalgic in the UK about the Open University. It's quite a romantic notion. I studied with the Open University. So there's lots of documentaries that we've got on UK TV where they show science students, where they would be sent stuff and they would do stuff in their kitchen. So that they would have stuff come in the post, and they would do these experiments and they would send it back. Now we've kind of got a better technologies to do that now, because students have all got mobile phones. You could record data, you could go out and do stuff in a city. So there's lots of different scope. We shouldn't be stopped. When I studied with the Open University, it used to be great when a book landed through for a new module, landed through the letterbox. I get to start my new module and I get to read these books. So I think we shouldn't forget physical things. So one of my areas of research, I use the concept of post-digital, where we say, well, kind of digital's gone now. Let's just accept it as being part of every day. And is it worth actually sending someone a book as an introduction to a course to say, here's a book that we recommend? You've kind of got the physical book there, but a lot of the other stuff is online. So it's how does the online, as I said at the start, how does the online and the offline work together? And if we have them as separates, they won't work. We've got to think about how they all link together. So yeah, maybe the physical is still important in online learning.
And we have two more questions, guys. I will read two of them because we are running out of time, and I think we will have just 5 minutes. So I will read both of them in one time. So the first one: do you feel that the current way we are educating children fully prepares them for the needs of the 21st century? This is the first question. And the second one: what do you feel the most exciting or effective learning environment would be?
The first one's a big question, right?
It is a big question. I was just thinking, we both got kids, Adam. Mine are a bit older than yours. What's been interesting, I'm not quite sure how to answer that question actually, Marta, but what has been interesting for me during the pandemic is my kids have had to learn online. They've had to attend online classes. They've had to use laptops for learning purposes rather than for the usual social media and games purposes that they normally have. And I think more and more learning will go online. So that's an inevitable direction. And it's been a good thing that if one good thing has come out of the pandemic, it's been that kids have got more au fait with going online, taking responsibility for learning. Actually, it's been good to see my 13-year-old actually direct his own learning rather than just going into a class and absorbing whatever the teacher would say to him. So I think that has been beneficial. I've seen good things coming from that. Don't know, Adam, you got anything to add to that?
I've put a link in the chat to a research paper of mine that kind of does this. so feel free to kind of take a look at that.
Thank you.
In a university context. So I think as again, I look back to the 1960s to the Open University. We can look back and kind of what do universities do? They research and they teach. We research what's happening in the world. And we're researching those new technologies to see how they work. So I think that still really holds true. I think we need to be really careful that we don't just say everyone needs to be a coder. That that isn't the case, I don't think. And I think as universities we should be championing that. The humanities kind of gets a bit of a bad kick here, I think, sometimes. But we need the humanities to kind of be creative with digital technology. So I think it's a good point that David made about people taking ownership of their own learning. There's a school of thought that says all information is online now, so go out and use it. I don't agree with that. I think that there is a role for schools and universities to be able to allow students to kind of do that. So I think it's interesting to see how things go. But yeah, I would advocate saying, well, actually, we've done a lot of this good stuff before, and we're just using new technologies now to do it.
What was the other question, Marta?
The second one. Just a second. What do you feel the most exciting or effective learning environments would be?
Oh, that's a really difficult question, isn't it? I agree a bit with Adam. I don't think we have a really exciting learning environment yet. We have lots of very, very good ones. And for Moodle, for example, you've got a whole range of plugins that go with that community so that you can customize and make your environment much more than just out of the box Moodle. What would be, I guess, something that kind of facilitated social learning a lot more, that enabled communities of learning to kind of spring up and be as engaging and as kind of graphically interesting, perhaps, or attractive as, say, more social media sites. I think your standard LMSs fall short of that. I'm sure it'll come in time, but it's not there yet. That would be the main thing, I think. Any other thoughts, Adam?
I think you're right. I think in terms of the kind of slickness of some of the systems that we've got is really difficult. So people are used to using Facebook, Twitter, Netflix, Amazon. Actually, Amazon's not a very good example. It's not very well designed, but people use it. But yeah, it's kind of, what do these environments look like from a more kind of user experience perspective? But in terms of a learning environment, I'll throw it totally the other way. We haven't really been out in the world that much in the last 12 months, and that's a really great learning environment. So that's what we should be getting students to engage with, regardless if we're getting content online or not. We should be exploring the world and what is the world doing, and as academics, that's what we should be doing and kind of reporting back on that. So yeah, I think there's a kind of a big world out there, and that's a really great learning environment. So might be a nice point to finish.
That's a very good sentiment to end on, I think.
Yeah.
Marta, I just want to just make one extra thing, which was we talked about the acquire, research, practice sort of model earlier. That's from Diane Laurillard, I think, at the UCL. So I just wanted to kind of reference that. It's adapted from what her kind of thinking and work on that.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Thank you so much. The answers was great. I think everybody's satisfied. Now we have to finish. We run out of our time. I want to thank EURAS again for hosting us, and all of the members for joining and active participation. Thank you, David, and thank you, Adam, for having such a good webinar. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for your time. Cheers.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Bye.
Thank you for everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Take care. Stay safe, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
See you
Thank
at the
you.
next EURAS webinar. Bye.
Bye-bye.